Some deals are too good to be true, and some are too strange to be anything but the truth. When the old kettle place came up for $1, one single dollar cash, at a county auction where nobody else even lifted a hand, the whole valley figured Delia Marsh had lost her mind. 160 acres of dead orchard and sagging fence for the price of a stick of gum. People said she'd been swindled. People said the land was cursed, or poisoned, or worse. But nobody, not one soul in that dusty little town, knew what the old man had left waiting behind that padlocked barn door. Nobody knew the condition buried in the fine print, the one Delia didn't read until it was already too late to walk away. I know, because I'm the one who was standing right beside her when she pushed that door open. And I'll tell you honest, I've lived 71 years on this earth, buried a wife and 2 dogs and more friends than I can count. I thought I'd seen every kind of thing a person can leave behind. I hadn't. Stay with me. Because what that woman found for $1 cost her everything she had left and gave her back something she didn't even know she'd lost. The first thing I remember is the smell, before the sight, before the sound, before any of it. Dust and old hay and something underneath that I couldn't name yet, Swedish and wrong. The way a room smells when something living has been shut inside it too long. Delia had her hand flat against the barn door, and she wasn't pushing. "You gonna open it or marry it?" I said. She didn't laugh. Delia never laughed at my jokes, which is one of the reasons I trusted her. People who laugh too easy are usually trying to sell you something. I should back up. I always do this, start in the middle and forget you don't know the shape of things yet. My wife used to say I told stories like a dog chases its tail, all excitement and no direction. She's been gone 6 years now. I keep a ledger by the stove, and every night I write down the weather and one true thing that happened, because if I don't write it down, I've noticed the days start bleeding into each other, and pretty soon you can't tell July from January, and you're just an old man in a chair. So, let me do this proper. My name's Renner, Silas Renner. I run Rand mostly, now that my knees have opinions, a cattle operation 2 miles up the county road from the kettle place, in a valley the maps call Cutbank, but everybody local just calls the draw. It's high country, short summers, long winters, and a wind that comes down off the ridge in February like it's got a personal grudge. Not the sort of place people move to. Mostly people move away or get born here and die here and never see much in between. The Kettle farm had been sitting empty going on 2 years when Delia showed up. Amos Kettle had owned it, him and his wife Ruth, before her heart gave out, for the better part of 50 years. I knew Amos the way you know a fence post you drive past every day. He was just there. A hard, quiet, closed-up kind of man, the sort who'd raise 2 fingers off the steering wheel when you passed on the road and consider that a full conversation. After Ruth died, he got stranger, stopped coming to town. The orchard went to ruin. And then one winter a couple years back, the mail started piling up in his box out by the road, and the county sent somebody, and the word came down that Amos Kettle had gone into the state care home over in Bellamy. Dementia, they said, though nobody knew for sure. And the farm went into arrears on the taxes, and that was that. 2 years it sat. The bank didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. Land that won't grow anything but rocks and regret. So the county put it up at the delinquent tax auction for the back taxes owed, which by law they had to open at. And they set the opening at $1 because they figured somebody, anybody, might as well take the headache off their hands. And Delia Marsh raised her hand. I was there because I'm nosy, and because the auction was the only entertainment in town that Tuesday. I watched this woman I'd never seen before, thin, mid-30s, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, a boy of maybe 9 standing next to her holding a backpack with both arms like it was a life preserver. I watched her raise one finger, pay $1 in exact change, and sign her name on the county's clipboard. Nobody bid against her. Why would they? Afterward, out on the courthouse steps, I introduced myself, told her I was her nearest neighbor and that if she needed anything she should holler, which is the sort of thing you say without much meaning it. She looked at me with a flat, tired steadiness that I've since learned was just her face, and she said, "You know the property." "Known it 40 years. Then you can tell me if I got robbed." I laughed. She didn't. The boy Tobe, I'd learned, was watching me with his father's absence written all over him, that particular watchfulness kids get when they've learned that grown-ups are weather, and you'd best keep an eye on the sky. "Tell you what," I said, "follow me out, I'll walk it with you." The house was worse than I remembered. 2 years of nobody had let the mountains start taking it back. A window on the north side had blown in, and the snow had gotten to the floor and buckled it. Birds in the eaves. The porch had a soft rotten give to it that I didn't like. Delia walked through it all with a notebook and a carpenter's pencil, writing things down, and I noticed she never once said anything hopeless out loud, not even when we found the kitchen ceiling had come down in a slow avalanche of plaster and mouse nest. "Foundation's good," she said, more to herself than to me. "Roof's the thing. If the roof's sound, I can do the rest." "You do this kind of work?" I did. She didn't explain the past tense, and I didn't ask. I'm nosy, but I'm not rude. Tobe didn't come inside. He stood in the yard the whole time, and every so often I'd glance out the busted window and see him just standing there, turning in a slow circle, looking at the ruined orchard and the ridge and the enormous empty sky like a boy trying to figure out if a place is going to hurt him. It was Tobe who heard it first. He came to the door, didn't come in, just to the threshold, and he said, "Mom, there's a noise in the barn." I want you to understand something about that barn. It was the one building on the whole property that was still standing square and true. Big old timber frame thing, painted a red so old it had gone the color of dried blood, and where every other structure on that farm had been let go to rot, that barn had a padlock on the main door. A new padlock, shiny. The kind of thing that stops you cold because it doesn't fit. A dead man's farm, 2 years abandoned, and here's a lock somebody bought recently and clicked shut on purpose. Probably an animal got in, I told her. Coon or a stray dog happens. But Delia was already walking toward it, and there was something in her walk now, faster, and the boy was calling Mom again, and when we got close I heard it too. Not a coon. A sound like breathing, big, labored, patient breathing, and under it a shifting, a great slow weight moving from one foot to another. And then, God help me, a voice. An old man's voice, cracked and thin, coming from inside that locked barn. "Ruth," it said, "Ruth, is that you? You're late with the water, girl." Delia stopped like she'd hit a wall. Tobe grabbed the back of her jacket, and I stood there with the hair standing straight up on my arms because I knew that voice. I'd heard it raise 2 fingers off a steering wheel for 40 years. It was Amos Kettle. Amos Kettle, who was supposed to be in the state home in Bellamy. Amos Kettle, who couldn't be here, who'd been gone 2 years, whose farm this woman had just bought for $1 not 4 hours ago. "Amos," I called. My own voice sounded strange to me. "Amos, it's Silas Renner from up the draw." A long silence. Then the breathing changed and something scraped, and that cracked voice came again, closer to the door now, lower, and it said the thing I've never forgotten, the thing I still hear some nights when the wind's up. "You come for the animals, you promised me. Whoever came, you promised." Delia had the boy behind her. She turned to me and her face had gone the color of the plaster ceiling, and she said, very quiet, "Silas, what is this?" And the truth was I didn't know. I only knew what I was looking at, which was a padlock and a locked barn, and a man's voice inside it who by every account and record ought to have been 40 miles away losing his mind in a county cot. "We need to get that lock off," I said. There were bolt cutters in my truck. There's everything in my truck. 40 years of a rancher's life rattling around in that bed, and I went and got them, and my hands weren't as steady as I'd have liked. Delia sent Tobe to sit in the cab of my truck with the door shut. He didn't want to go. She knelt down and said something to him I couldn't hear, and whatever it was, he went. She had a way with that boy, a short supply patience that she spent on him and nobody else. The lock gave with a snap that echoed off the ridge, and I pulled the door open on its long groaning track, and the smell came out at us in a wave, that Swedish wrongness I'd caught at the start, thick now, hay and dung and animal and old man, and beneath it all faint, the smell of a body that hadn't been washed in longer than it should be. The light fell in through the door in a long gold bar full of floating dust, and I saw what Amos Kettle had left waiting behind that door, what Delia Marsh bought that Tuesday for $1 American. Animals. The barn was full of animals. Not livestock, not the way you'd think, not a business, not anything that made a lick of sense. It was I don't have a better word than what Delia said later, standing there with her hand over her mouth. She said, "It's a home." An old dog, a shepherd mix gone white in the muzzle, three-legged, dragging herself up to standing to bark at us twice and then, deciding we were all right, sitting back down. A mule so old and so blind its eyes had gone the milky blue-white of the sky before snow, standing patient in a stall, ears swinging toward the sound of us. Goats, 4 of them, one with a foreleg that had healed crooked. A pen of chickens gone half-wild, missing feathers but fed but watered. A barn cat with one eye and a litter of kittens tucked into a nest of feed sacks, and more. Rabbits in a hutch. A pig, ancient and enormous, lying on its side breathing like a bellows. A crow, if you can believe it, perched on a rafter with a wing that hung wrong, cawing down at us like it was our fault we were late. Every animal in that barn was old, or hurt, or broken in some way. Every single one. Not one of them worth a dime at market. Not one of them a thing a sane man would keep and feed through a mountain winter. And in the middle of them, sitting on an overturned bucket in a nest of blankets, was Amos Kettle. He was a ruin of the man I'd known. Thin as a rail, white beard grown wild down his chest, wrapped in a canvas coat 2 sizes too big. But his eyes, when they found me, his eyes were clear. Not the fog I'd been told about. Clear and frightened and fierce. "You're late," he said. "I've been rationing. There's feed for maybe another week if I'm careful. You have to promise me before I show you the ledger. You have to promise me you'll keep them." His voice cracked. His hands were shaking. "Ruth would never forgive me. I promised Ruth." I didn't understand it yet. None of it. It'd take days to put the pieces together. How a man in a state care home had gotten himself back to his own farm. How long he'd been here. How he'd been living. That's a story for later. Right then, all I could do was stand in the doorway of that impossible barn and look at a dying man surrounded by the broken creatures he'd refused to let the world throw away. Delia moved past me. I'll tell you, I've thought about that moment more than almost any other in my life. Because here was a woman who had, by the evidence, almost nothing. A boy to raise. A ruined house she'd bought sight unseen for $1 because $1 was what she could afford. Whatever had broken her life before she came to the draw, and something had, you could read it on her like weather, she'd come here to start over small and quiet and cheap. And she'd just found out that her $1 farm came with a dying stranger, and 30 animals nobody else on earth would keep. She had every reason in the world to turn around, to call the county, to hand it all back, say there'd been a mistake, the man's not supposed to be here, this isn't mine, I didn't sign up for this. Instead, she crossed that barn floor and she crouched down in front of Amos Kettle so they were eye to eye, and she looked at the shaking, frightened old man, and she said, steady, flat, the same voice she'd used on me at the courthouse. "How much water do they get? Show me the amounts. I don't want to guess and get it wrong." Amos Kettle looked at her. And that hard, closed-up, ruined old man, I watched something break open in his face that I don't think had opened in years. His chin went, and his clear, frightened eyes filled up, and he reached into his big canvas coat with both shaking hands and brought out a notebook. Water-swollen, filthy, held together with a rubber band. His whole life system in it, I'd find out. Every animal, its name, what it ate, what hurt it, how much, how often. "You have to do the mule first," he said, opening it, his finger trembling down the page. "She frets if she's not first. Ruth always did her first." "Then I'll do her first," Delia said. And that was the beginning of it. Now, I could tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't. Nothing about that autumn was simple, and I'd be lying to you if I painted Delia Marsh as some kind of saint who took one look at a dying man and 30 broken animals and never had a second thought. That's the kind of story people like, and it's the kind of story that isn't true, and I promised myself when I started keeping that ledger by the stove that I'd stop telling myself comfortable lies. Here's the truth. That first night, after we'd gotten Amos settled and fed the animals off his ledger, and I'd driven a shaken Tobe up to my place to sleep, because there wasn't a safe bed in that ruined house. That first night, Delia sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, and she cried. Not soft, not pretty. She cried like something was being torn out of her, with her fist pressed against her mouth so the boy wouldn't hear from the other room, and when she could talk she said, "I don't have money for this, Silas. I don't have money for me. I've got $400 and a truck that's dying and a kid, and I bought that place because it was the only thing in the whole state I could afford, and now there's a man in the barn." "We'll call the county in the morning," I said. "They'll come get him. He's supposed to be in care. None of this is on you." And she looked up at me with her face all wrecked and she said, "And the animals." I didn't have an answer for that. Because we both knew what happened to a barn full of old, blind, three-legged, unsellable animals when the county came. We both knew there wasn't a rescue in 300 miles that could take 30 broken creatures. We both knew. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. She was quiet a long time. Outside, the wind was coming down off the ridge, and I remember I got up and put another log in the stove, and I wrote in my ledger. I remember exactly what I wrote, because it was the truest thing that happened that day. I wrote, "A woman with nothing found a man with less, and did not run." "Here's the thing nobody tells you," Delia said finally to the window to the dark. "When you've lost everything, I mean everything, Silas, when you've been scraped all the way down to nothing, you find out what's underneath. And it turns out what's underneath for me." She stopped, shook her head. "My husband would have said I was a fool. He always said I couldn't walk past a hurt thing, said it like it was a defect. Maybe it is." She never told me the whole of what happened before the draw, only pieces over the months, that there'd been a husband, that there'd been a house, a real one, and then there hadn't been, that she'd learned carpentry from her father and lost the trade somewhere in the wreckage of it all, that Tobe used to talk more than he did now. But that night she told me the shape of her decision, and the shape of it was this. "I'll call the care home in the morning," she said. "I'll find out how he got out and whether he's got family and whether he's got long. I won't pretend I can keep a dying man alive by myself. I'm not stupid. But I'm not calling the county to come throw those animals in a truck, not while there's another way to look for. He kept them alive out here alone, sick, for I don't even know how long. The least I can do is not undo that in one phone call." "Dell," I said, "you could lose the little you've got, real chance." "I know it." "Then why?" And she gave me the answer that I've carried ever since. The answer that I think about every time I drive past that barn. The answer that is the whole of who that woman was. "Because somebody paid $1 for this place too once," she said. "You know what I mean. Somebody decided a long time ago that this whole place, that old man, those animals, that all of it was worth about $1. And I can't be one more person who agrees." We found out a good deal in the following days, and none of it made things simpler. Amos Kettle had not. In fact, lost his mind, or not the way they'd said. He had spells, confusions, moments where Ruth was still alive and he was waiting on the water. But between the spells he was clear as glass, and what was clear was this. He had walked out of the Bellamy Care home in the spring on foot, and made his way the 40 miles back to his farm over the better part of a week, because his neighbor's boy had told him, on a visit thoughtlessly. A kindness meant as news, that the county had put his place up for sale and nobody wanted it, and the animals were gonna get taken care of. Amos knew exactly what taken care of meant. So he walked home to die with them instead. He'd been living in that barn since spring, rationing feed he'd hoarded, hauling water from the creek, keeping his broken family alive with a notebook and a rubber band, and a stubbornness so total it bordered on holy. He'd bought that padlock in town with the last cash in his coat and locked himself and his animals in against a world that had decided they weren't worth keeping. 6 months, alone, sick, he'd done it for 6 months. And the county, the state, the care home, nobody had even known he was gone. That's the part that I still can't get quiet with. A whole man walked out of a whole institution and lived 6 months in a barn 40 miles away, and not one system anywhere so much as noticed the empty bed. That was what waited behind the door. Not treasure, not a secret worth money, something both smaller and enormously larger. A promise a man made to his dead wife that he refused to break, no matter what it cost him, no matter that the whole world had already signed off on breaking it for him. The Dr. Delia finally got out to the farm, a young woman from the clinic in Bellamy who came on her own time and asked no questions she didn't have to. Said Amos had weeks. Maybe. His heart, his lungs, the long, slow damage of the winter and the walking and the not eating. Weeks. She could move him to the hospital, she said, where he'd be more comfortable at the end. Amos, clear-eyed that afternoon, said no. He said, I'll die here or I won't die easy anywhere. And Delia, who by then had spent 9 days doing the mule first every morning and learning the ledger by heart and sleeping in the ruined house with Tobe under a tarp over the one dry room, Delia said, then you'll die here, but you're not doing it in the barn. We're getting you in the house. House isn't fit, Amos said. It will be, she said. Give me a week. I want to tell you about that week, because that week is when I stopped being a nosy neighbor and started being something else. But the light's going and the fire wants tending, and I've learned that some things you have to tell slow or you don't tell them right at all. So I'll leave you here, at the end of the first part, with this. A woman who had nothing gave a dying stranger a place to die, and inherited 30 broken animals, and did it all in a house with the roof half gone and winter coming down off the ridge like it had a grudge. Everyone in town said she'd been robbed. Everyone said the place was cursed. Everyone said $1 was too much to pay for the Kettle farm. They were wrong about nearly all of it. But there was one thing they were right about, one thing none of us saw coming, one turn in this story that I still can't tell without my hands going unsteady, and it happened 3 weeks later, on the first hard night of snow, when we found out that Amos Kettle had left one more thing waiting. One thing even he hadn't told us about. One thing behind a second door. I didn't sleep right for a month after we opened it. The week we spent fixing that house is the week I learned what Delia Marsh had been before her life came apart. Could work. Lord, she could work. I'd been around builders my whole life, hired plenty, buried a few, and I'd never seen hands move like hers on a rafter. She'd learned it young, and it had gone all the way into her bones, the way a language does when you're a child, so that even after the years away her body still knew things her front of mind had half forgotten. She'd stand under a sagging joist for a full minute, not touching it, just looking, and then she'd know exactly where to put the jack. Never guessed. Never wasted a board. We didn't have money for wasted boards. I brought what I had. 40 years of a ranch means 40 years of a scrap pile, and my scrap pile turned out to be worth more than the whole Kettle farm at auction. Old lumber, a coil of roofing felt, a box of mismatched screws, 3 windows I'd pulled out of my own place a decade back and never thrown away because throwing things away is a habit I never learned. We hauled it all down the county road in my dying truck, load after load, and Delia and I, and, when he'd let himself Tobe, we made one room of that ruined house fit for a man to die in. The boy is a story of his own. He didn't help at first. He'd sit on the porch step and watch, holding that backpack the way he always did, and when I'd hand him a hammer he'd set it down beside him like it might bite. Delia didn't push him. She had that short supply patience, remember, and she spent it careful. But the animals got to him where we couldn't. It was the crow first. The crow with the broken wing that couldn't fly and had opinions about everything, and it took a liking to Tobe for reasons crows keep to themselves. It would hop down off the rail and follow the boy around the yard, cawing, and Tobe started saving bits of his lunch for it. And then one afternoon I looked over and the boy was talking, out loud, to a crow. A whole conversation, low and serious, and the crow tilting its head like it understood every word. That was the first time I saw Delia stop working to watch her son. She stood there with a drill hanging in her hand and she watched him talk to that broken bird, and her face did something complicated and she went back to work without a word. But she wiped her eyes on her shoulder first. She thought I didn't see. I saw. Amos named every animal, and Tobe learned all the names. The mule was Ruthie, named for the wife, which about broke my heart when I understood it. The three-legged shepherd was Captain. The blind old pig, enormous, ancient, was Governor. The crow was just Crow, because Amos said a crow won't answer to a fancy name, it thinks it's above you. And I believe that's the single most accurate thing anybody ever said about a crow. Tobe learned them all. Within 2 weeks that silent, watchful boy could walk into the barn and tell you which goat was off its feed, and which chicken was getting bullet off the water. And Amos, on his clear days, would quiz him from the doorway, wrapped in his big canvas coat, propped on the cane I'd cut him. "Who eats first?" "Ruthie." "Why?" "'Cause she frets." "Good. Who's slow this morning?" "Governor. He didn't get up when I came in." And Amos's face would go grave and he'd say, "Watch the governor. His time's coming. You watch him close, and when it comes you don't let him be alone. You hear me? Nothing dies alone on this farm. That's the rule. That's the only rule that matters. Nothing dies alone on this farm." I've thought about writing that on a board and nailing it over my own door. We moved Amos into the house on the 9th day, and for a little while, a week, 10 days, it was almost good. He was weak, but he was clear more often than not. Delia cooked for him off the little propane ring we'd rigged, soft food he could manage, and he ate more than the doctor from Bellamy had figured he would. He sat in the one good chair by the one good window and watched the barn through the glass, and he could see his animals being tended, and something in him eased. You could see it ease. A man who'd carried a weight alone for 6 months, finally, for the first time, letting somebody else take a corner of it. He talked to me in there, those days, more than he'd talked to me in 40 years of 2 fingers off the wheel. He told me about Ruth, how they'd never had children, tried, couldn't, and how that particular grief had shaped their whole marriage into something turned outward, toward the land, toward the animals, toward every stray and broken thing that ever wandered onto their place. Ruth couldn't stand to see a thing suffer, he said. Started with a dog somebody dumped out here in 71. Then it was just what we did. Word gets around, even among animals, I think. They knew this was the place you came to when nobody else'd have you. He laughed, a dry, papery sound. We were the last stop, the $1 farm, huh? Suppose we still are. He told me about the walk home from Bellamy. Wouldn't tell Delia, didn't want her to know how bad it had been, but he told me, old man to old man. 6 days on foot, sleeping in ditches, and once in a church that left its door unlocked. A trucker who gave him a sandwich and didn't ask questions. He'd had one thought the whole way, he said, one thought that kept his feet moving when his heart wanted to quit. They're going to be scared and they won't know why nobody came. Animals don't understand being abandoned, he said. They just understand that you didn't come. And I couldn't, Silas, I could not be a man who didn't come. Not after Ruth. She'd have walked home too. She'd have walked home faster. That's the man the county valued at $1. That's the man the whole system lost track of and never noticed missing. I asked him once, gently, because you have to be gentle, whether he had regrets. Whether the walk, the winter, the wearing himself down to nothing, whether he'd do it again knowing it would kill him. He looked at me like I'd asked whether water was wet. Course I'd do it again, he said. What kind of a question is that? A promise isn't a promise if you only keep it when it's easy. Any fool can keep an easy promise. He turned back to the window, to the barn, to Tobe crossing the yard with a bucket. That's the whole thing right there, he said quietly. That's the whole of everything I know. You come, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Otherwise the word doesn't mean anything, and neither do you. The snow came the third week. Not the soft kind. The hard kind. The kind that comes down off the ridge in the draw like the sky's got a grudge. And I'd been watching the sky all day and I didn't like it. And I told Delia I didn't like it. And we spent the afternoon hauling every animal that could be moved into the barn and banking the walls with straw. By dark it was coming sideways. By midnight you couldn't see the barn from the house window. And that was the night Amos took his turn. Delia woke me. I'd taken to sleeping on a cot in the fixed-up front room those last weeks, because I didn't like her and the boy alone out there with a dying man and a mountain winter. Delia woke me with her hand on my shoulder and her face white, and she said, "His breathing's wrong. Sela's. It's wrong." It was. I'd heard that breathing before. My wife at the end. It's a sound you don't forget and don't mistake for anything else. The long pause, then the catch, then the long pause. The body forgetting, remembering, forgetting. We couldn't get the doctor. The road was gone under 3 feet of snow and more coming, and the phone in that house had never worked, and my truck wouldn't have made the first quarter mile. There was no help coming. There was just us and an old man and the storm. Delia sat on one side of the bed and I sat on the other, and we did the only thing there was to do, which was be there. She held his hand. His clear moments came and went like the wind, lulling and gusting. Once he thought Delia was Ruth, and he smiled at her, this radiant, helpless smile, and said, "You came back." And Delia, God, that woman, Delia said, "I never left," and let him have it. Let him have Ruth at the end. It was the kindest lie I ever watched a person tell. And then, in one of his clear stretches, Amos gripped her hand hard and his eyes sharpened, and he said, "The other door." "What?" "The root cellar under the barn. There's Delia, there's a second door I never showed you. I meant to show you and the days got away. Behind the feed room, under the trap in the floor." His breath caught, released. "You have to go before spring, before it thaws. Promise me you'll go look, promise me." "I promise," she said. "I promise, Amos, I'll go, but you have to rest now." "Not Treasure," he said, and his mouth did something that might have been a smile. "You'll be disappointed. Everybody always wants it to be Treasure." The pause, the catch, the pause, but it's the most important thing. It's the thing it's why any of it you'll understand when you see Ruth's handwriting, not mine, Ruth's. And that was nearly the last clear thing he said. He went out slow through the rest of that night, with the storm screaming against the window and the one propane ring hissing, and Delia holding one hand and me holding the other. 2 old ranchers and a broke young widow keeping a promise to a man most of the world had already written off. Toward morning Tobe woke and came and stood in the doorway, and Delia started to send him back to bed, and Amos, surfacing one last time, said, "Let him. Nothing dies alone on this farm." So the boy came and sat on the end of the bed with his hand on the old man's blanketed foot, and that's how Amos Kettle died. Not alone. His own rule kept to the letter by 3 people who'd known him 3 weeks. He went at first light. The storm broke about the same time, the way they do, sudden, the wind just quitting all at once and a hard, clean silence coming down over everything. Delia closed his eyes. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Tobe, who I had not heard cry once in all those weeks, that watchful armored boy, Tobe, put his face down against the old man's foot and cried like the world was ending. And his mother came around the bed and gathered him up. And I got up and went outside into the snow, because some grief you've got no business watching. I stood in the yard in the terrible new silence, and from the barn I heard the animals stirring, waking, hungry, not knowing. Ruthie the mule brayed once low, asking, and I understood that somebody had to go feed them. That's the thing about a farm, about a promise, about being the one who comes. The animals are hungry whether or not your heart is broken. The living don't stop needing just because the dying are done. So I wiped my face and I went and did the mule first, because she frets. We buried Amos next to Ruth, up on the little rise behind the orchard where she'd been laid 12 years before, as soon as the ground thawed enough to dig. Half the town came, which surprised me. Turns out a lot of people had bought their 2 fingers off the wheel from Amos Kettle over the years and hadn't known what to make of it and were glad, now, at the end, to have somewhere to put it. The young doctor from Bellamy came. The trucker who'd given him the sandwich heard somehow and came and stood at the back and left without saying who he was, and I only found out later. And after, days after, when the worst of the snow had gone and the ground had softened, Delia and I went down into the barn, to the feed room, and we found the trap in the floor under a drift of old straw, and we opened the second door. Amos was right, it wasn't treasure, not the kind people want. It was a room, a small dry stone-walled root cellar, cool and close, and it was full of books, ledgers, 50 years of them, every animal that had ever come to that farm, every stray, every dumped dog, every broken creature nobody else would keep, written down. Name, the date it came, where it came from if they knew, what was wrong with it, what it liked, what it feared, and the date it died, and one line, always one line, about how it went and who was with it. 50 years. Hundreds and hundreds of animals, and most of the early ones, most of the whole first half of it, were in a different hand than Amos's, a rounder, surer hand. Ruth's handwriting. She'd started it. In 1971, with a dumped dog, she'd started writing them down, every last one, because, and this was written in the front of the very first book, in that round, sure hand, and Delia read it out loud in the cold cellar with her voice shaking, because a thing that is loved and then written down cannot be truly thrown away. Someone will always know it was here. That's what waited behind the second door. Not gold. A ledger of the unwanted. 50 years of one man and one woman refusing, over and over in their own 2 hands, to agree with a world that had decided some lives were worth about $1. Delia sat down right there on the cold cellar floor with 50 years of it in her lap. And she cried again, the tearing kind, and this time she didn't hide it, and this time I didn't leave. I sat down next to her and I let her. And when she was done, she wiped her face and she looked at all those books, and she said the thing that told me she was going to be all right, that the boy was going to be all right, that the $1 farm had maybe saved her as much as she'd saved it. She said, "We're going to need more shelves. Not I'll figure out what to do with these. Not I should donate these somewhere. We're going to need more shelves, present tense." Continuing. She was going to keep the book. She was going to keep the farm. She was going to be the next hand in the ledger, and someday, I understood, looking at the boy's silhouette up in the barn doorway, talking to a crow, someday it would be Tobe's. That was 4 years ago now. The house has a whole roof. The orchard's coming back. Delia and Tobe pruned the old trees hard 2 springs running, and last fall we got apples, real apples. The first off that land in a decade. Governor, the old pig, passed that first winter, and Tobe sat with him the whole night so he wouldn't be alone, because that's the rule, and the boy has never once broken it. Ruthie the mule is somehow still going, blind and ancient and first at the trough every morning. Crow follows Tobe to the school bus and is waiting on the mailbox every afternoon when he comes home, and the boy talks now, talks plenty, though I notice he still saves his most serious conversations for the bird. Delia took her trade back up. Word got around the way it does, and now she frames houses all over the county, and folks pay her real money. And she puts it into the farm and into the boy and into feed for a barn full of animals that will never be worth a dime and were never supposed to be. People still say she got robbed, paid a whole $1 for that cursed place. She just smiles when they say it now. She doesn't argue. I go down most mornings still. My knees have more opinions every year, and one of these winters I won't make the walk, and we both know it, and neither of us says it. I help with the mule. I do her first, And afterward Delia pours me a coffee and we sit on the porch that doesn't sag anymore and we watch the boy and the animals and the light come up over the ridge. And most mornings we don't say much of anything at all. But one morning last week, she said something I've been turning over ever since. She said, "You know what I keep thinking about? He locked that barn. New padlock, locked himself and all of them in against the world." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "And I keep thinking he wasn't keeping something safe in there. Not really. He was keeping a promise. A locked barn's just a promise you can see." I didn't have anything to say to that. Some things you don't answer. You just write them in the ledger by the stove, one true thing a day, so the days don't bleed together, so you can still tell July from January, so that when your own turn comes there'll be some proof you were here and you came when it counted. I wrote that one down. And underneath it I wrote the thing Ruth wrote in 1971, the thing that started all of it, the thing that a dying man walked 40 miles through the cold to make sure somebody else would carry. That a thing that is loved and then written down can never be truly